I'm in the 5-point section of Atlanta. Behind me, Atlanta PD. They're actually all around. Some barricades are being set up. This area definitely belongs to the protesters. There's some counter-protesters here. We're gonna follow along, see what happens. It begins now. Grab your seats. It's time for Counter-Terrorism Roll Call. Welcome to Counterterrorism Roll Call. I'm your host, Holt Clark. A group called Refuse Fascism planned for national protests on November 4th. I did a video before the event, and you can find it clicking here. There were protests scheduled all over the nation. I went to the one in Atlanta, Georgia, in an area called Little 5 Points. It's safe to say that this area was supportive to the protesters. Now, I did see a variety of groups there. No large showing of Antifa dressed in black bloc. There were people who looked ready to dress for battle. There was a guy with spiked gloves and gauntlets. He had a collapsible baton and a sheath, and he had a codpiece that said 666, good boy, with a picture of a dog. I didn't interview him. I'm not really sure what his perspective was. When I got there, it was very different from the protests I've been to in the last couple of months. There wasn't any pre-staging of resources, or very little pre-staging of resources. There were some barricades sitting around outside. I talked to a few store managers, although none would appear on camera, and most didn't even want to talk to me when I told them that I was training police officers. But one store owner did tell me that some SWAT guys had been there to talk to them about what was coming up. And one of her employees mentioned they've seen a lot of Stormfront posters over the last week, but they kind of thought it was just trolling, that somebody was trying to make it look like there was going to be a big counter-protester presence. They didn't really believe it. And if they did, they were confident that this area would fight them and drive the Nazis away. The Atlanta PD did cordon off a protest area with the barricades, and kitty corner, they set off a counter-protesters area. There were not many counter-protesters over there. There was one small group of protesters that showed up. They had no signs, no insignia, no obvious affiliation other than carrying an American flag. The Atlanta PD did not stop traffic. They didn't search. They didn't put up any prohibitions to anything other than existing government law and Atlanta ordinances. For example, they didn't say no masks, no black bloc, no weapons. It really was just another Saturday night in 5 Points. The officers themselves were in their normal duty uniforms. No riot gear was visible, but I did see them bringing in an unmarked tractor trailer that was staged nearby. I suspect that that had riot gear in it. There was a SWAT team there, but they were a good block, if not 2 blocks down the road, staged. They didn't use them during the night, during the protests. This protest in Little 5 Points was a little bit more like a typical protest. It wasn't what we've seen lately with 2 groups across the street screaming at each other. There were speeches, there were banners, there were signs, there was chanting.
Much more fear of this regime continuing another day. And that's reason for people to stand up, to face fear, and to come out into the street and say no more.
Now, there were some counter-protesters mixed in with the group, maybe holding up a sign proclaiming, their belief in the other side. But I didn't see any animosity, nobody screaming at each other. The biggest effects on the event was the rain. A hard rain drove off all but the police, the media, and the hardcore protesters. Most everybody else just went home. At one point in the rain, the counter-protesters came across chanting, USA, USA. One of the groups that was there that will be of interest to my audience was Cop Watch. Cop Watch of East Atlanta is a group of civilians organized to protect our communities from police abuse. So they stood there with their video cameras. I went up to them and asked them for an interview.
Hey guys, I do a training for police officers. You mind if I interview you about your opinion of how they're doing today or what they're doing?
We're busy right now.
One of you can watch and one of you can talk. This goes to their training. if your goal is to get them to do better policing, this is a great way to do it. All right, thanks.
Something tells me that they really weren't interested in reaching law enforcement. I think they probably have another agenda. Officers were very laid back. They were very polite with the crowd. They talked to the crowd and never seemed to take one position or another. I overheard a lot of conversations, and it was like, yes, I understand your point, but they were never confrontational.
I mean, even before this last political election, we were dealing with protests.
But in this protest, you had a lot of self-proclaimed anarchists, anti-capitalist, communist, socialist, and then there was this guy.
I'm only $5. Stay dry, protect your weed, cell phone, and cigarettes, guys. Get your content.
I could not get anybody on the protester side to speak with me, though I made a lot of requests. I couldn't get the store owners to speak to me, even though I made several requests, and was specific at what I wanted to talk about. The counter-protesters were eager to talk about what they were saying, and here's what one of them told me.
I think there's no such thing as too many cops in a situation like this. There's a lot of people over there that have a track record of violence, and we're just here trying to exercise our First Amendment rights. These guys are doing a good job of keeping us safe and separate from people who want to hurt us.
I think this was a very successful protest from a law enforcement perspective. The weather helped, no doubt, to make it short and just drive some of the people home. No doubt that was a big help. But even though this was billed nationally as a huge protest, there was still a small protest in a very friendly to the cause area. I didn't see any organized counter-protest of any size building online or at the event. And I've got to assume that the Atlanta PD has much better intel than I, and we're very aware of this. The posture of law enforcement was different in this protest from Shelbyville, Knoxville, Murfreesboro. It was a highly visible presence of law enforcement, but in duty uniforms. You didn't see riot gear, you didn't see mounted units, you didn't see the SWAT team who was, again, staged down the street. I think they were very ready for that if it turned into it, but they didn't come in with that view. They didn't want to provoke or maybe kind of get the protesters riled up in any way. It seemed to be a pretty good decision. And when you're a department of greater than 2,000 sworn officers, it gives you a little bit more flexibility to take this stand. But again, I think that this worked in Atlanta for the Atlanta PD because they know their area and they planned this event to fit that situation. Now, if your jurisdiction has a protest coming, you may want to view my videos on Knoxville here and then on Shelbyville here. And I'm going to have a video coming up soon, probably within the next week, on Murfreesboro. So that you don't miss that, make sure that you subscribe and that you also click on the bell-shaped icon to give you notifications so you never miss an episode. Until next time on Counterterrorism Roll Call, be alert and be safe. Thanks for watching. Please visit our sponsor, PatriotThreads.org, and stay tuned for a special offer from them. Would you do me a favor and hit the like button? And if you haven't yet, subscribe. If you want to know more about me, go to my website, follow me on Twitter, or just run me on NCIC. I'll see you next week on Counterterrorism Roll Call. Until then, be alert, be safe. PatriotThreads.org is apparel with a purpose. Patriot Threads offers state-themed, game day to outdoor lifestyle apparel, like the new line of Southern Trout shirts, and introducing the new Back the Blue shirts. All are 100% printed in the USA. Are you looking for a new, exciting, profitable fundraiser? PatriotThreads.org would love to help. Go to their website for details. Use promo code ROLLCALL at checkout and you could save 20% on the sale. And Patriot Threads will donate 20% of the profits to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. PatriotThreads.org is a proud sponsor of the men and women of law enforcement.